President Mahama have cautioned African leaders to brace themselves for the potential downfall of the war in Iran on the economies of Africa. If you are unaware, on Monday, March 2nd, 2026, the Revolutionary Guard of Iran announced that they have closed the Strait of Hormuz. Strait of Hormuz is a water passway that about a quarter of all oil used in the world pass through. So the closure of that water way means that most of the oil that is being used in the world, about 20 million barrels a day, will not be able to reach the rest of the world. And that would have a more devastating impact on oil prices as it stands now, which means that African countries who are recovering from the impact of COVID-19 and the Ukraine war have an additional shocker to worry about. And that is what President Mahama was cautioning African countries about. My name is Nenebi Tony. I'm a Ghanaian writer who lives in the US. On this channel, I like to talk about geopolitics and trade from the perspective of an African. And so if you like intellectual conversations, subscribe to this channel. Over the weekend, a new conflict erupted in the world. Israel and the US attacked Iran, and Iran responded by attacking allies of Israel and the US in the Middle East. And the conflict seems to be heating up more and more with each passing day. The fallout of the conflict is yet to hit the rest of the world, but it is coming. Oil is used in virtually everything. You don't even have to use oil directly to be impacted by the cost of oil. Let's say I just finished eating, what was the name? Chips, right? The chips is made in the factory. The factory uses oil to power their machines. So the price of the chips could go up if the price of oil goes up. So this is something that have the potential of making our economies worse than they already are. And that is what President Mahama was speaking about when he spoke in Tanzania on Tuesday, March 3rd, 2026. President Mahama is in Tanzania to formally open the 2026 session of the African Court, which is in Arusha, Tanzania. You know, Arusha, Tanzania houses the African Court because around the time the African Court was constituted in 1998 and it formally started operating in 2004, Tanzania was in the best form as a country to host it. Why? Because the International Tribunal on Rwanda was already being constituted in Arusha. So there was already presence of a legal system that addresses conflict outside of the borders of Tanzania. So it only makes sense to go to a place that already have the infrastructure for it. And so that is why the court is located in Arusha. Now, the African Court of Human Rights is supposed to enforce the African Charter, right? But about 20 countries in Africa have not yet ratified it, which means that the African Court cannot rule on issues involving 20 countries in Africa, which President Mahama addressed when he gave his opening speech. He talked about the fact that African countries need not be afraid of the African Court, they should embrace it. And he shared a personal story of how his dad was imprisoned after the overthrow of President Nkrumah, and how he was also imprisoned again after he wrote a letter to General Echampon, who used to call himself an Nkrumahist. Anyway, so President Mahama was painting the picture that you could be impacted by things happening in your country, and you may want protection outside of your country, and that is when the African Court comes in. This is a very powerful thing for President Mahama to say. And there is something that I have a little asterisk about that. And to come to the asterisk, let's go back to the conflict in Iran. Since the US and Israel hit Iran, a lot of people have been doubting the efficacy of international law because nobody seemed to be able to check the US. If international law is so powerful, why is the US always breaking the law and getting away with it? Right? Because we live in the real world and not Narnia, we need to understand that evil exists in the real world. And the role of the law is to mitigate the evil. I don't think that we can ever eradicate evil from earth. We can only mitigate it. And law does a very good job at mitigating evil. Let me give you an example. It is a crime to rob people everywhere in the world, as far as I know. And yet, robbery happens almost every day. Think about the rate at which robbery happens. If there was no law against robbery, imagine how many more robberies could have happened. So when you think about how the US over the years have broken international law with impunity, think about how worse the US could have been if there was no international law. Think about it from that perspective. And the reason why other countries do not seem to check the US when they break international law is not because they are afraid of the US, it's because he who comes to equity must come with clean hands. And almost every other country is breaking international laws from time to time. I'm giving you an example. The issue of the human rights court. You know, ECOWAS court, which is the ECOWAS Court of Human Rights, right, is a court which Ghana is a party to, which means that if ECOWAS court makes a decision on any matter, the government of Ghana is supposed to enforce or accept that decision. In 2022, the ECOWAS court ruled that Woyome's human rights was infringed upon by the government of Ghana when they were, charging him for his, corruption case. Woyome took the decision of the ECOWAS court to the Supreme Court of Ghana. The Supreme Court of Ghana said, well, ECOWAS court is not the highest court in Ghana. The highest court in Ghana is the Supreme Court. So the decision of the ECOWAS court does not matter to the Supreme Court of Ghana. This is not the same as dropping bomb in another country. But what this tells us is that whenever a country has the chance to break international law and get away with it, like Ghana did in the case of the ECOWAS court, they do it. So the US government does things that it know it can do and get away with it. And no other country has the moral high ground to check them. That's about it. Because all of our governments don't respect international law. And that's what this is about. All right? Now, speaking more on the issue in Iran, there is this thing that I've seen people talking about, which is the fact that the Secretary of State of the US, Marco Rubio, keeps saying that Israel is leading the charge in the war in Iran. And people are wondering, why would the US let the world think that they are the subordinate of Israel? Shouldn't they want to claim to be boss? That is something that Marco Rubio is doing to get away with breaking a law. And I'll explain to you. Since 1976, when the Churches Committee sat on the abuses that the CIA did around the world from the 1950s to the 1970s, the US has a provision that the US government and people working on behalf of the US government are banned from committing assassinations around the world. And do you think that the US government is going to stop committing assassinations just because the law says they shouldn't? Know? They find creative ways to still do assassinations and get away with it. For example, under President Obama, the US wanted to take out Gaddafi, the leader of Libya. So what they did was they targeted Gaddafi when he was in a location that was close to where rebels were. They hit his convoy and weakened him. And the way they dropped, the drone strike happened, the rebels were immediately alerted to the exact location of Gaddafi. And so they ran over there and captured Gaddafi, beat him up, and unalived him. So the US got away with assassination of Gaddafi because technically they didn't do it. They only hurt him, and his own people took him out. You understand? The same thing is happening in Iran. So what the US did was hit key places in Iran, but did not personally hit the residence of the Ayatollah. Israel did that. So by saying Israel is leading the charge, the US government is saying that we did not break the law around assassination. It's Israel that did it, not us. So if it's a crime for you, the government of Israel to commit assassination, that is Israel's issue, not the US. So people who like to break laws, people who like to do evil, will find creative ways to do it. The thing that law does is make people think twice. And I was listening to a podcast by Ted Cruz, who is the senator of Texas, where I stay. And Ted Cruz said President Trump met with some lawmakers, some senators and representatives on Friday to ask their opinion on what the US was about to do in Iran. And they unanimously decided that this is the best time to take him out. So when, you can pass. So when they decided that this is the best time to take him out, he gave Israel the permission to do it. And now he's here telling us that Israel was leading the charge because he wants to get away with the law around assassination with technicalities, right? So back to our issue on the Human Rights Court. While President Mahama is lauding and, asking African countries to embrace the Human Rights Court, even countries who have embraced the Human Rights Court, like Ghana, like I said, are doing a poor job at enforcing the rulings of the Human Rights Court. And that is something that we need to get better at. And I'll end this by going back to what I started with. It is coming. This is the second video I'm making on the potential impact of the war in Iran on Ghana's economy. And I know in 2022, when the Akufo-Addo administration said the Ukraine war was why Ghana's economy was suffering, a lot of people criticized him because he was not likable at the time. But one thing that I have repeated on this channel since I started this channel a year ago is every single thing that happens anywhere in the world affects you. Sometimes it doesn't affect you directly like the way maybe increase in the price of oil will do, but it affects you in ways that you may not be aware of. And that is what I want us to be mindful of. That is actually the point of this channel. One of the things I do on this channel is to let you understand how the life you are living is impacted by things that you have no control of outside of your country. All right? Subscribe if you want more revelations on how things around the world are impacting you and how Ghana is also impacting the rest of the world. Subscribe. All right? Let's talk later.